I finally got my Hoyt GMX 3 Series riser back and Hoyt Axia limbs. Technically, these aren't actually my original riser and limbs. These are replacement ones. And I'm going to set this up as a bare bow today and let you know why it's been so long that I haven't featured this bow on this channel. So as I went over in previous videos reviewing this riser and those limbs, I noticed a few different problems and I showed you some of those on this channel. There's been quite a few requests as to an update on the actual riser and limbs, but I didn't want to update you until I had the actual riser back in my hands and the limbs to let you know if the problems were fixed or not. And I also gathered a bit more information that I'd like to share with you in this video. Full disclosure, as I said before, I bought this riser and limbs combination from Lancaster Archery Supply. They had no idea other than my name on the order, and they just shipped me a box off the shelf. Nothing fancy, nothing special, nothing hand-picked, and I found issues with both the riser and the set of limbs. First, I'll talk briefly about the riser. Now, the riser had some issues with the centering of the stabilizer bushing, the centering of the bushing in the back of the riser, as well as some features on the bow that were machined potentially off-center and off-kilter, including the tiller bolts. And overall, due to what I saw, I felt that I wasn't getting what I paid for as a consumer. So after going back and forth with Doug at Hoyt, Doug the engineer at Hoyt, and even though he didn't quite believe that I had an issue because I could still align the bow, he did in fact believe that there was an issue, and I'll let you figure out for yourself as to why all of the bows out there were on back order and just now are starting to ship again. I'm happy to say that a lot of the issues that I saw are fixed, but I'm still going to go over the riser with you in a little bit and share that with you. And like I said before, I paid for that bow. Nobody knew that I was getting it, and it came from Lancaster, and Hoyt didn't hand-pick it. This riser and limbs directly came to me from Hoyt, and I'd be shocked if they were not checked over by some people at the factory before it made its way to me. So that's the riser and what I saw wrong with it, and I'll show you a bit as to what has improved, because I'm very happy to see that. Now the limbs. I had a set of limbs that were defective. The reason that they were defective was the actual little plastic dots that are on the limb tip now, the limb fork area. They weren't fully seated against the limb surface itself, and that was a warrantyable set of limbs. Basically, if you were to look from this area and try to see any sort of daylight and hold it up to the light and see any sort of gap between that plastic piece and the surface of the limb, you may have yourself a warranty issue as well, and you might want to contact the place you bought the limbs from. So these limbs I did string up and shot a handful of times because I wanted to see if there was any sort of issues with them. Again, just gathering some data so I could share that with you in this update before I set it up as a bare bow. Now the limbs themselves, like I said, that first set, the actual plastic piece wasn't touching a limb, and that second set that they did send me that they supposedly hand checked over had some issues with them as well, including the plastic piece not being against the limb surface, as well as some clear coat dripping issues that was not exactly ideal and not what you pay for, not what you want to see when you pay for a set of limbs that are this expensive. So I'm happy to say that looking at these limbs now that they are the official replacement set of mine, there is a lot less clear coat on them. The edges are much sharper, meaning they did not overly spray them, probably solving that issue with the clear coat dripping issue. Also, if you look really, really closely at the plastic bits on the limb itself, you'll see that they look a little bit different. They're a little bit shinier, and they have some marks on them and some indications that make me believe that they appear to be machined, and that would be a good guess, I believe. Now, what I found before I shot them was a clear coat issue. I think maybe a clear coat issue or a bit of a resin issue bonding with the actual substrate of the carbon fiber and the top layer on this one limb. Now the limb that you'll see on the bottom section of the screen relative to the top, you'll see in this area here near the detent area, there's like bubbles, micro bubbles and things like that. I don't see anything else, any sort of finish that is wrong anywhere else on the limbs themselves, but there is that little spot there. And on the back side of the limb where the labels are, you'll see one of them where it's supposed to say the Axia over here. There's a bit of the label missing For whatever reason, it just says GPF AXI and then there's no A, but that's just on the bottom limb. Not a big deal, just sharing that information with you. So again, I'd be shocked if this bow had not been checked before it was sent out to me. And I want to show you a few things that I think is still concerning to me on the riser itself. Now that the stabilizer bushing is centered, as you can see here, it's definitely perfectly centered relative to the bow. According to my eye, it's centered relative to the recessed boss that's machined into the surface of the riser as well, so it looks good to me. This bottom bushing here is also centered, I believe, and the bushing below the grip also looks to be centered. The tiller bolts themselves, I put them up against a machine ruler and measured the riser itself, and it's one of the straightest Hoyt risers that I've seen, personally speaking, so I'm very happy to report that everything seems to be straight. Now, one thing that I still notice that's a problem, actually there's a couple of things, but the first thing that I noticed was the surface on the back of the limb, the feature below the bottom bushing, the top bushing and the backside just below the grip here. It's interesting because the profile, this little like webbing, for lack of better terms, back here that you'll see, that little webbing area, it's still uneven. You'll see the tooling marks here as the actual cutter surface leaves the riser there. It's uneven left to right for whatever reason. And if you look really closely down here at the chamfers, or the radius on the sides of the limbs, sides of the riser rather, it's uneven as well, equally uneven as this surface is here. So I don't know why that is. It's an unimportant feature of the riser, and it's not going to affect the performance most likely, but it's still showing me that there's something going on in their tool pathways or something that's creating some sort of uneven surface that is not intended to be uneven. At least I can't imagine as to why this is uneven. Maybe it is due to flexing, but because everything is centered underneath this section, it's not probably done on purpose. If it was up in this area where the sight window goes around and things like that to affect the way the riser flexes, that would make sense. But down here where everything is straight and centered, just doesn't make any sense at all. Other than that, aesthetically, everything looks excellent on the riser. The Cerakote looks beautiful. Everything is done very, very well. And now, in my opinion, this riser itself looks like it's worth the value that the money is being spent upon it. So it does look like a really nice piece. One thing that I always do when I check these limbs in the riser is to see if it fits into the actual, onto the tiller bolt without falling out of the riser. Because if it does, that means that it's a little out of spec. Either the limbs are oversized or the tiller bolt's undersized, or maybe a combination thereof. And it's really a big problem, in my opinion, if the tolerances and the interface, the most important critical interface of the actual limb to the bow, is not tight enough to hold it in place, because then that means there's lots of play here. That means that there's some sort of gap between the fork of the limb where it's supposed to fit into the actual tiller bolt, and that play will allow your groups to shift left and right downrange if you bump your bow. It will also take you much longer to sight in every single day when you string your bow up, because your limbs might be strung in this way versus this way, and it takes time for the limbs to actually get themselves centered back out possibly. And it can just definitely cause some issues that I don't like and I wish was much better. That's why I make and sell precision tiller bolts that are sized and guaranteed to be within a very particular tight spec. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. So this top limb falls out of the top tiller bolt quite easily, and I'm not even doing anything and it just falls right out. The bottom limb seems to be a little bit better fitment onto the top tiller bolt. It doesn't really want to fall out unless I start shaking it, and then it might want to fall out. Same thing on the bottom. It will stay, and then if I shake it, it'll fall out. So the tightness there, the tolerance there, is just about the bare minimum that I would ever want to see in my personal opinion, and at least it's snug enough to hold the limb into the bow without snapping the detent in place. The reason I said it's the most important interface of the limb to the riser is because the way the ILF thing is here, the dovetail, the detent, it self-centers itself relative to that U-shaped channel that receives it, so it should keep itself centered because of the way the limb is pushed down into the bow when strung. So it's really just up to the limb tolerance left and right to make sure that the actual interface is tight enough and resists twisting, resists shifting, resists all sorts of movement when strung. So what I do to check some of these tolerances is I use a set of calipers to at least get a rough idea as to what I'm seeing in regards to measurement. These aren't super high-end calipers. They are much higher end than just your basic cheapo ones from Harbor Freight. These are still from Harbor Freight and they're not necessarily certified, but I do trust them because I've ranked them against a micrometer that I have here that measures tiller bolts, and at least everything is very, very consistent every single time I use this. So they're not perfect, it's just to get a rough idea. And when everything's zeroed in inches, I can measure the inside diameter of the fork of the limb here, and this is the bottom one, the one that stayed in the bow when I put it in backwards. And I'm getting somewhere in the neighborhood of 373 and a half thousandths of an inch is what I'm getting there, which actually, I'm happy to report, is the tightest limb, the tightest Hoyt limb, the smallest measurement there of any set of Hoyt limbs that I have in my possession, and I have a lot of Hoyt limbs in my possession. Now the top limb, when I measure it, is 375 thousandths even, which again is exactly within spec. According to ILF standards, the inside diameter of this slot should be 375 thousandths of an inch. A lot of limbs out there like the Ukas will be undersized because they have a lot of clear coat buildup on them. And generally speaking, what I've seen is Hoyts tend to, in my experience, come a little bit oversized, so they always fall out of the pocket. And that's why I offer those precision tiller bolts in 380 thousandths of an inch outside diameter to take up the play of oversized or worn out limbs. So I'm happy to report that those limbs are beautiful, they're perfect within spec, and they're exactly what I would expect for the dollar spent. Now, when I take out the tiller bolts themselves to measure those, it's a different story. So in the past, I used to remember exactly what the Hoyt tiller bolt specs were. From what I remember, the outside diameter of the shank here, where the limb fits into, should be 375 thousandths of an inch, plus 0, meaning no bigger than 375 thousandths, minus 3 or minus 2. I can't remember. I think it's minus 3 if I remember correctly. So that means that this bolt should be anywhere from 372 to 375 thousandths of an inch to be within spec, according to what Hoyt has told me in the past, or somebody at Hoyt, in regards to the actual tolerance of this tiller bolt. Again, I'm pulling from memory, so I might be saying something that's out of line, but either way, when I measure the outside diameter of this bolt here, it's 371 and a half thousandths of an inch. And when I take the other one and I measure that as well, 371 and a half thousandths of an inch. So it may very well be that these tiller bolts are out of spec. Obviously, like I said, that set of calipers is not certified and they're not super high dollar. This is a micrometer with carbide faces on it. It is not certified, it is old, and I have used this in the past and calibrated it against a certified one, and it was great and measured the same, and I set it to be the same. And what I'm getting here on this one is just under 372 thousandths of an inch, and this other one here is 371 thousandths of an inch. So I'm getting a full thousandth of an inch under what the potential spec should be. I don't think it was -4. I think at worst it was -3 or maybe even -2, as I said, plus 0. So it should be 372 to 373 to 375. That's what those are supposed to be. So these are undersized, and that's why the limb still falls out of the bow, despite the limb being within spec. Now, if I take a precision tiller bolt here, a 375 thousandths of an inch Kaminski Archery precision tiller bolt in black, may or may not be coming out at some point in the near future, put it into the bow. Again, we guarantee that these are no bigger than 375, And our specs are -1 plus 0, so that means it's anywhere from 374 to 375 thousandths of an inch. I take a limb, put it in backwards. This is the top limb. It stays. I shake it, and it barely wants to come out. Now I take that bottom limb, the one that stayed in much better, and it ain't coming out no matter how much I shake it. I suppose if I kept shaking it, it may eventually come out. But both of those limbs fit because this tiller bolt is within spec. If you're interested in grabbing a set of these precision tiller bolts, head to my website, jkaminski.com. I'll have a link in the description below and a card at the top up there. And also, if you're interested in any of the products I'm showing you in this video, including the GMX3, the Axia limbs, or any of the other accessories, I will also have links in the description below. Those are affiliate links, and it genuinely helps this channel out if you click on those before you shop. I don't have any discount codes for you there, with the exception of Arcor grips. If you use my last name, Kaminski, at checkout, you get 10% off all their grips. But eventually, possibly, I'll have some sort of discounts with some of the other affiliates that I've got working with me. So these black tiller bolts will be available for sale in the very near future. I'm looking to launch some pre-sales here very, very shortly. So if you haven't yet, also sign up for the mailing list at my website, because I will notify you there first when those are available for pre-sale. And yeah, I got some other things that we're also working on in the very, very near future. So with all that being said, those are really the two things that I still see wrong with this riser. Other than that, everything seems to be quite nice. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna just set this thing up as a bare bow. And what I wanna do is first get the bow tuned up, I believe. And then I'm gonna go and put, in the next video after this one, I'm going to put the OEM dampeners back in the pocket. I was doing some measuring and stuff, and test these OEM dampeners against the Ramrod's powdered tungsten weights that go in the pocket themselves. They are dampened because of the powdered tungsten, and we'll put them to the test and see how they compare to the OEM dampeners after I get this bow tuned up in the next video. So, full disclosure, I did a little bit of quick and dirty alignment already on this bow as far as the limb alignment is concerned, because I did want to shoot a couple of arrows out of it in case something funky was happening. And I'm excited to see over time if the limb creaking that I was experiencing also goes away. I think that was related to the plastic inserts in the limbs not being all the way inserted, and they were creaking and cracking after each shot. I don't have the Hoyt barebow weight yet. Maybe one day I'll be able to get one and do a bit of a review on that. So I'm just throwing this brass barebow weight on the riser itself to begin with, that I've got from Thunderstruck Archery. They hooked me up with this quite some time ago, and I really like it. But I think shooting a standard barebow weight like this with the pocket dampeners and the ramrod dampeners will really give me an idea on how much of a difference those actually make, if at all. So because I've already preliminarily set up this bow, but I haven't tuned it yet, like the knocking points are completely off and I have no idea where the bear shaft is going to be, I am going to work on tuning the bow in the next video, along with the review of those ramrod tungsten powdered weights. Basically, I just wanted to do a bit of an update on this riser and limb combination because several people have been asking about it, and I didn't want to keep making people wait for that, especially because I just got the replacement set back in only a few days ago. I believe that many of them are starting to ship out there and fulfill back orders that have been piling up. And I'm happy to say that I like what I see. There's really nothing wrong with what I'm seeing at the moment, and everything absolutely looks much, much better. There's a lot of improvements that have been done, and hopefully now those people that have been waiting for their bow on back order will start to get their bows so they can get out there and start shooting them. Hey, if you like this video, consider sharing it. Genuinely, it helps this channel grow. I don't operate any other social media, and I rely on you to help spread the word about the channel. I produce all this content for archers around the world to enjoy for free. I try my best to produce as unbiased and fair reviews of equipment on this channel that I possibly can. I did pay for this bow out of my own pocket, and that's why I can be just as brutally honest as I choose to be. So if you wouldn't mind, please do consider supporting this channel. There's many different links in the description below. I can't thank my supporters enough. I wouldn't be able to produce this content, at least not to this level, and definitely wouldn't be able to do as many reviews without you, so thank you.